I think I'm really stuck between two types. I'm stuck between a best friend kind of person. So like we vibe with a whole lot of things, and like they're just someone that I can like see like hanging out on my couch and stuff. But then there's alt girls. I see a girl with like really dyed hair, platform shoes, and spiked chains, and I'm like, step on my throat, please.
Dean, we know why you're into that type of girl.
Your mad ramblings about Resident Evil 8 have proven that.
And I don't think you want me to say it out loud because we've made this joke too many times.
Do it. Do it.
You're more of a sub.
Oh my god. It's...
And there it is, folks.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Oh my god.
This is the intro you wanted, right, Dean?
Not really, but I mean, I'll...
SEAL Team Bottom has been deployed.
They're an important part of people's breakfast.
Here's the thing about sex in fiction. You don't need to have a fucking sex scene.
I can't stand those books. They make me so mad.
I can't replace a fire alarm on my own.
Say your morning routine.
Lemonade across my bed.
An unexpected pregnancy. That baby just... It's like, who's your mommy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild podcast. I'm joined tonight by Gabe.
Hello.
And Alex.
Hi.
So, tonight we're going to be talking about queerbaiting, which is, I think for many in the LGBTQIA plus community is a pretty troubling thing to be watching. Before we get to that, Alex... you weren't there when we first introduced this, but for odd number episodes, we're going to be doing a regular segment called the check-in, where we're just going to be talking about stuff that we've been working on, or stuff that we've been working on lately. So like creative writing wise, or reading wise, or whatever. So like if you've been working on anything, or if you've been like reading things, then this is your time to check in.
Cool. I've been doing a lot of schoolwork. Okay, well, I've started one of my classes this term. I am taking a creative writing class this term for script writing. So I've been like trying to write a script. Have not gotten very far into it yet. It's a very new experience, but I'm liking where my story is going so far.
What's it about?
It's about a girl and her father, and they've like moved to a new house after the girl's mother died, and they're both like dealing with grief in very different ways, and they like the father keeps like shutting everyone out and isolating himself, and the daughter finds this like really frustrating. So she goes outside of her house, and she meets these like flower spirits in like the flower field surrounding the house, and they kind of like walk her through her grief and like help her come to understand her father better, in an attempt to like reconcile their relationship and stuff.
Ooh, that sounds exciting.
It's very different than what I normally write, but I think it'll be good if I can ever like actually write it.
You got this. We believe in you. So Gabe, when we first did the check-in, you were talking about Lemon Heart. Do you have any progress on that?
I don't have any significant progress. I'm roughly into my third chapter, or to rewriting my third chapter. That is. Other than that, no other significant progress. I have finished like a rough outline of the story though, so the deadline hasn't changed. I haven't changed my deadline for end of 2021. It'll be done by then.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah, so for me, the biggest thing would definitely be working on Xeno again. I'm just getting at the tail end of finishing the current chapter that I'm working on, and it's been bugging me how I wanted to end it for a while, because in the original rewrite of it, or in the original draft of it, it was supposed to end, or this current chapter was supposed to end in a fight scene, but I think taking it in a more slower pace would probably be a better save, considering how it gets a lot more action packed in the subsequent chapter after it. But I think then like it would just have to come down to prioritizing, because then it would be like a real roller coaster of like, you know, high intensity action and then sudden drop off in things. So like I have to learn how to pace it properly, I guess. But yeah,
Pacing is always fun.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the check-in. These will always be on the odd numbered episodes, and I've still yet to really define what we do for even numbered episodes. And as always, we have a final check out, but we'll get to that when we're done the episode. So like I said in the intro, tonight we're going to be talking about queerbaiting, which if you were to just do a quick Google of it, I'll read the Wikipedia description of queerbaiting right now. So queerbaiting is a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment in which creators hint at, but then do not actually depict, same-sex romance or other LGBTQ representation. So I think we have done episodes similar to this last season, but instead of talking about queerbaiting right now, I think it'd probably be better to start with examples just to kind of help fill everybody in. So we all know what the description is. Now let's talk about some notable examples. And I'll let Alex kick us off with them, and then we'll go from there.
Great. That is fair because this was my suggestion. I actually wanted to start off with the most notorious example of queerbaiting in recent history, which is the CW TV show Supernatural. So Supernatural ran for 15 seasons. In season 4, introduced the character of Castiel, who was immediately shipped with one of the main characters, Dean.
Not me.
Not you, Dean Winchester from Supernatural.
Aha,
a different
quirky podcast host line. Aha.
They were shipped for all 11 seasons that Cass was on the show. Cass was actually a very, very popular character. And then, if you haven't been following, you know, the crazy internet drama surrounding this. In the third to final episode of season 15 of Supernatural, Castiel confessed his love for Dean and then immediately died and was not on the show in the last 2 episodes. So Dean was actually, like, there's lots of people that have gone into more detail than I will about this topic, but Dean was a character that from like pretty early on in the show often made references to like queer culture, and was suspected to be a bisexual character from like really early on in the show. And there's lots of examples of him, like, it looks like he's flirting with another male character, or he like winks at one, or he'll make references to things that like parts of queer culture that a straight audience would not necessarily pick up on. And this is like a pretty essential way that queerbaiting works, is there will be lots of references to things that like a queer audience will understand, but then straight people will be like, nah, it's all in your head. And so the reason Supernatural is a big deal is like, it's not the kind of show you'd expect to find queer representation in. It's very like a dude bro show. You know, it's about these 2 brothers traveling around the countryside, hunting like demons and vampires and the like. never killing God, but coming close to it. And like a lot of people thought that having one of the main characters in a show like this be bisexual or queer in any way would be very impactful. And again, this show ran for 15 seasons. By the end of it, I'm pretty sure a large part of that audience were people hoping that like something would come of Dean and Cass's relationship. And I think the showrunners were aware of this, considering Castiel's confession and immediate death, which is another thing we could talk about, but we don't. I don't think we have time to talk about Bury Your Gays here either.
Oh no.
We sure do not. But that's another harmful like trope around gay characters. But yeah, that's Supernatural in a nutshell. Lots of tension between Dean and Cass through the 11 seasons they were together. I think at one point Cass literally describes their relationship as having like a profound bond. And there's like endless gifs of them all over the internet where you can see them just like looking at each other, and like if you have the eyes for it, you can see why people shipped it and why people wanted and even expected it to become canon. And in a way, it sort of became canon, but also not really.
Was it really worth it, though? That's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing. Again, this show ran for 15 seasons, 16 years. And so half-assed confession in the third to last episode of the entire show, with one character immediately dying, the other character dying 2 episodes later, and them not getting anything. If the show really wanted there to be a queer relationship, they had 11 seasons to do that, and chose not to.
Yeah. And that's actually something that I want to touch on when we get to later in the discussion, but oh my god. When I found out that like everything that had been happened between those two and near the ending, I'm like, what the hell? I'd stopped watching Supernatural a while ago, but even then I kind of understood that at least Castiel deserved some kind of, or like a better ending than he did, especially when it came to Dean, because they really did have a good dynamic, those two.
Yeah,
like,
they sure did.
They had like good chemistry, and to see it like half-ass acknowledged, and like, like expectations between fans are always going to be divisive, and that's why it can be hard to like have established characters suddenly change their motives. But like even then, you're right, there were 15 seasons of the show to like properly work in good representation and not queer bait, but it almost seemed like it was coming out of nowhere. Like everyone always kind of assumed that, or like everyone, like for me, I always kind of assumed that they were playing into the relationship a little bit, but then they weren't really they weren't really leaning on it. And this was like way before I was even out, and at that point still like a straight ally. Even I was able to notice it, like, this isn't good. I don't think this is right.
Yeah, see, for me, I started watching Supernatural, I think when it was like airing around season 9 or 10. And then I stopped watching like a few seasons later because it gets old really fast, not gonna lie.
It does.
But like I've seen a lot of people talking about like the end of Supernatural as it was coming up, and I've like from the whole time was like, guys, don't get your hopes up. Nothing's gonna happen. And then everything that happened. If you're unfamiliar with the situation and want like a full rundown, the YouTuber Sarah Z has a really good video like going over the whole series of events, and everything that kind of led up to it, because it was a wild ride. But like, it was something that I, from the start, was like, there's no way they're going to do something with it. And the fact that they even acknowledged it on the show was more than I was expecting. But it was also like a lot worse than I was expecting.
Yeah, like at the like near the end of the series finale. Why? Just you really like you were really like dangling the wire for your queer fans this long, and it's suddenly like, oh, it's not actually anything, you pieces of shit. It's just something else.
Yeah, and I think
we got you.
That's like a really common attitude with like the creators of shows accused of queerbaiting. Is like, you know, they'll have this long running thing, they'll like sort of acknowledge it, and then like throw it away and be like, haha, you thought you were gonna get something, you're reading too much into it, don't be silly.
Yeah.
It's really toxic in my opinion.
Yeah, oh my god. I think it's with, so I was kind of touching on this earlier, but I think now would be a good time to talk about it. The thing is, when it comes to TV shows, because they have a longer longevity compared to movies, they need to, you know, they obviously need to have more time for character development, whatever. But that in turn has, like, it opens up so much potential for queer baiting, because then it just like ham fists a whole lot of character development almost out the window sometimes, and it doesn't ever really portray it well. It definitely, you know, with with two examples that I'm going to mention, it almost seems like another case of just dangling the rope, and that is in the DC movie or the DC TV universe, whatever the hell their name is, particularly with Supergirl, Kara, and Lena from Supergirl, and Laurel and Nyssa from Arrow. Now, I'm not too familiar with Supergirl because I didn't watch the show, but I was familiar with Laurel and Nyssa.
I don't know. I have watched Supergirl. I'm actually in the middle of watching season 5.
Okay,
so I can contribute.
Okay, so then from with Arrow, I guess I'll touch on that briefly. Laurel and Nyssa had they had a central connection, and that was Sarah, the sister. And they like Sarah and Nyssa's relationship was stated, but then suddenly when it was between Laurel and Nyssa, it was like, will they, won't they? Which is like a huge problem, the whole will they, won't they thing. Because like there are members of the LGBTQIA plus community watching that. They are investing in that relationship, and chemistry often is the reason why a lot of ships begin in the first place. You know, no matter if it's two men, two women, a man and a woman, like sometimes the chemistry is just too much to notice, and it's pretty good. So I guess with Laurel and Nyssa, I did like the relationship, so I'm thinking maybe, but then nope. No, it's a CW show. Not gonna happen.
CW. They're gonna pop up a lot in this conversation.
I think so. All right, so can you elaborate with Supergirl?
Okay, here's
Or
actually...
Can you expand with Supergirl?
Yeah, so here's actually something that I mentioned briefly before we started recording, which is sometimes people are more likely to notice queerbaiting than other people. I've watched the first 4 seasons of Supergirl. I'm currently in the middle of season 5. The ship in question is again Kara, who's the protagonist, and then Lena Luthor, who is, I mean, if you know anything about DC, which I don't, but the Luthors are like one of the like antagonistic families. And so for me watching the show, I knew other people shipped Kara and Lena. I never got into it because I was like, well, she's a Luthor. She's going to become a bad guy. And guess what? I was right. But yeah, the ship in question is Lena and Kara, which is they have a very close friendship, where Lena is again a Luthor, her brother is Lex Luthor, and she's always been kind of like burdened by her family name. That's kind of like her main plot line, and so she feels like she can't trust anybody because everyone's going to betray her, and everyone thinks she's going to betray them, and that she's going to become an evil person, and that's kind of like her whole character is like struggling with that part of her identity. And then she meets Kara, and Kara's whole personality is like, oh, give everyone a chance. Like, she's not a bad guy just because her brother's a bad guy, you know, like, she's her own person, and she kind of became this support system for Lena, which, like, you can understand why people, I can understand why people ship them. And like I said, I never really got into it, which is also partially because I watched Supergirl for the lols instead of for like actual enjoyment purposes. But like I can understand why people ship it. You know.
Yeah, some people see the chemistry, and ultimately that's what compels them to like each other. You know, that's what like creates the ship. But then suddenly, if it's something, I feel like if it's something like purposefully put on by the creators of the show, like they had intended this from the start, there's something like icky with it.
Yeah, and
like,
well, this is,
I was gonna say nefarious,
actually,
but like I was just gonna say like icky. It feels kind of gross.
Yeah, but like I think this is actually an important conversation to have with queerbaiting, because a lot of people will see like two characters have good chemistry on screen, and then the characters won't like end up in a relationship, and the show will be accused of queerbaiting. But queerbaiting is like an intentional thing.
Yeah,
like if
it's
like
a marketing
it's just,
tool.
Yeah, it's like if it's in the like again in the case of Supernatural, it's like the creators acknowledging that people ship these two characters and playing it up on the show and doing the, oh, will they, won't they, stick around to find out kind of thing, so that they'll get that queer audience without actually having to, you know, have queer characters and like having to commit to that, because, you know, that could isolate a different audience, the homophobes, which, you know, everyone's favorite audience.
Yay. Love them. They're so great. Oh my god. So obviously you know, moving on, obviously queerbaiting doesn't just extend to TV. I had already said before that like because of TV's, you know, natural like season long history, like there are issues there, but like when it comes to also like other kinds of media, there's also queerbaiting in movies, and I think sometimes in video games, and the one
and in books.
The one screen ship that I'm thinking of is Finn and Poe from the sequel trilogy of Star Wars. They were like heavily they were like heavily I don't want to say heavily queerbaited, but like there was a bit of queerbaiting there, because chemistry wise, you know, it's a nice like bro thing. You know, two friends saving the galaxy and shit, and I didn't initially think of like any kind of relationship between them like at all. I thought they were more or less just like friends, but then I don't know if it was an intentional decision, but there'd been, you know, both Oscar Isaac and fuck, what's Finn's actor again? Or who's Finn's actor?
John Boyega.
John Boyega. They had both been open to the idea of them being, you know, them having a queer relationship. I'm probably misquoting, but like, you know, they I don't know, I didn't know how to feel about that at the time, because I was still very much to myself as code, I guess. But I think it's fine. Like, to me, it was fine that like, okay, that's fine. You know, they could probably acknowledge it. But then suddenly, when that started to gain traction, the hell did Star Wars do? They didn't do shit. They kept them, I think, they kept them away from each other for like for the good rest of like the trilogy, I think, for certain moments. They were apart from each other.
Like love interest characters that they had significantly worse chemistry with.
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah. And they were straight.
Like Finn had Finn had both Rey and Rose, neither of whom I ever saw as like a couple. And then Poe had his like weird ex-girlfriend show up in the last movie. It felt very forced.
Yeah.
See, I only watched the first movie in that trilogy because I'm not like a huge Star Wars fan. But even I remember like watching it and going like, okay, I can definitely see why people ship those two characters. I think also if we want to go with Star Wars for a minute, because they've done some other stuff, because I think this is a good chance to talk about like another form of queer baiting. I've heard other people have like come up with different terms for this, but it's like, you know, that thing that Disney does where they're like, hey, come watch our new show. It has the first openly gay protagonist in a children's live action. Come watch our new movie. It has the first openly like lesbian character in an animated movie.
Mm-hmm.
And like they have like a new first gay character like every like twice a year or whatever. Because Star Wars did that for like the third movie in the trilogy. I don't even remember what it's called. But they were like, oh yeah, there's gonna be a gay character in it, and then you watch it and it's like a 3-second throwaway kiss scene between two like irrelevant characters or something. I didn't watch it.
Background too.
Yeah.
It's
in like the last 10 seconds of the movie.
Moment.
Yeah.
It's like by design, blink and you miss it so that they can edit it out for like releases in countries where that's like a taboo.
Yeah.
Or like
exactly.
Yeah.
That's like, I fucking hate it when Disney does that. It's so like vague, like it's so like obviously transparent that they're trying to bait in like young members of the community, especially, to thinking, oh, it's like, you know, here's your representation, and then it's like barely a mention.
Yeah, or we could also talk about the live action Beauty and the Beast remake. This one was like one of the first ones to do this, where they're like, oh yeah, this one character is gay, and then there's like the only thing in the movie to confirm it is there's a scene at the end where he ends up dancing with a guy that could easily be played off as a joke, especially because the character is literally named the Fool.
Mm-hmm. It's icky. It's a bigger pull too, because in a way, Supernatural, Supergirl, and Arrow have their own fans, right? Like they have eventually, like they have their own committed fan base. But with Disney movies, especially Disney movies, they're going out to such a huge public audience that everyone, like a lot more people are going to be exposed to it, especially younger kids, which is in itself an issue, and we'll get to that later. But like I don't know why I immediately jumped to movies, because there's one other TV show that is guilty of queer baiting, and that is Sherlock, specifically BBC Sherlock.
Yeah.
Yes, this was like the first thing I wrote down when I wanted to talk about queer baiting.
I'll let you start with it then.
Okay. BBC Sherlock, my favorite show to trash on. But seriously, there's a lot of problems with Sherlock. The queer baiting is like the tip of the iceberg somehow. But basically, for those of you who do not know, it's basically a modern adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes novels set in modern London. It follows Sherlock, played by the one and only Benedict Cumberbatch. I considered saying something else, but it's fine. We can refer to his actual name instead of banana cucumber bread or something else.
You're so professional.
I know. And then his best friend John Watson, played by Martin Freeman, both like huge big name actors. I think this show is actually what caused them to blow up in the first place.
It was, yeah.
and now they're in everything. But yeah, so it was the first few seasons just kind of like follow their friendship as they, you know, solve crimes around London, deal with Moriarty and other bad guys. But even from the very first episode, they play up the fact they play up the chemistry between the characters like a lot. And there's literally there's a scene in the first episode where they go out to get food together, and they have this conversation about like, oh, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? It's okay if you have a boyfriend. And like, it's a question that's never really answered. People often mistake them for a couple.
Yeah, that was the first episode, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the first episode. It's like right before they figure out it's the cab driver. Spoiler alert, don't watch Sherlock. But yeah, it's like, and then throughout the show, people like, I think Miss Hudson, the person who's like their landlady, will often be like, oh yeah, two men living in a flat, and people will like be like, oh, they're basically married, or oh, they're dating, you know, like people play it up constantly. There's also like another scene, I think it's in the second season, with Irene Adler, which is a whole other can of worms. But like Irene Adler in the show is said to be a lesbian. And she has like this conversation with John where they talk about Sherlock, and she's like, oh yeah, you're in love with him. And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm straight. No one seems to believe me, but I'm straight. I'm into women. And she's like, oh, so am I. But then it's implied that even though he says he's straight and she says she's gay, they're both into Sherlock, which is problematic on so many levels. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll get to the statement in a second, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm into stress. Yeah.
It's a whole other kind of panic.
Yeah. And then there's just, they play it up constantly. You know, for a show that has fucking 13 episodes, there's a lot of queer baiting they stuffed in there. Like, and they didn't hold back. Like, they went in on it from episode 1. And like, even though John got married in season 3, and season 3 was about like his wife and his like marriage, it's still just like, I think season 4 ended with like this weird montage of like John and Sherlock living their lives together. Sherlock is weird.
That's one way of saying problematic, but okay. I agree with you though. Like, I think ever since you two like have enlightened me to the idea of trash talking Sherlock, I don't think I've looked back. Because one thing that is like genuinely pissed me off as you were sharing this is like how they've waved off like certain things, or like, you know, acknowledging relationships and shit just by waving it off as a joke. I fucking hate that. It's like,
I didn't mention this earlier, but Supernatural does the exact same thing where, like, especially in the early seasons, where Dean and Sam, who are brothers, by the way, I would like to point this out, will like check into a hotel together or something, and they'll be like, oh, do you want one room? And they're like, or like one bed, and they're like, no. And it's like heavily implied that people think they're a couple.
Yeah. Fucking hate
again
it. Like
they're brothers.
It's such a thing. Like, I don't have any kind of like clever commentary for that. I just fucking hate it. Stop doing that. more than anything, Hollywood, fucking stop doing that. It's invalidating so many things. But I guess going back to examples, because there's so many to pick apart from. Let's quickly touch on a book. And said book series, said series, we love trashing.
Oh dear.
On.
Is this it?
Not fully. We have that episode Is it next week?
Are we talking about Cassandra Clare? Please tell me we're talking about
Sarah J Maas.
Damn it. Okay, we'll get to Cassandra Clare in a minute then.
Okay. I mean, if you want to save everything, if you want to save all of our rants for the Sarah J Maas episode, then we can just talk about Cassandra Clare now.
No. Go say what you want to say.
Okay. Ever since I've done more research on queerbaiting, Sarah J Maas is very guilty of queerbaiting, especially with Manon and Elide. It bugs the fuck out of me now, because when I was first reading this series, I was like, oh, they have a really nice dynamic, and then suddenly they have a really fucking good dynamic. I think better than like half the straight couples on like in the series.
It's because she does not know how to write romance.
Yeah, and like while I'm still kind of iffy if they should like pair them up, I really, really wish that she had just done more with them. Because Queen of Shadows, like, they had great chemistry. I loved their mini side arc together. But then in Empire of Storms, fucking men just ruin everything.
Also, I know I've said this in the past, but I just want to say it again and make my feelings on this very clear. Lorcan, that's his name, right? Elide's love interest. Fucking hate that character. I hate him so much, and I think he was one of the worst characters and love interests she introduced in the series.
I'm excited for I'll try to wrap this up quickly, but like I'm excited for the Sarah J Maas episode because Brooke read the series after I lent it to her, and Brooke is very opinionated, so I'm very excited to hear what she says. But anyway, oh my god, in Throne of Glass 2, there was in Kingdom of Ash, Alex, I don't know if you've like read it yet, but
I have not.
Yeah. Should I talk about it then, or do you want to?
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay.
You can spoil it. I literally do not care.
All right, Dorian and Fenris kind of have a thing, but like, it's almost like waved off, I think. And
have a thing how?
I don't know. They're just like, complimenting each other and like hyping each other up, and like people are so obviously thinking, oh, ship, and I'm thinking, no, queer baiting. Because up until then, like there had been no thing. There had been no there's been the standout man-to-man dynamic with Dorian and Kale, which I don't think was queer baited. Like it was very obvious that like they didn't have anything together, and Sarah didn't push any kind of thing on that. But Dorian and Fenris was pretty much teased, and that's no.
This is like queer baiting adjacent, because like with your thing about Kale and Dorian is I definitely shipped them when I read them, but I agree that I don't think it was queer baiting. I think it was just like an example of a straight author not realizing that two of their characters that are like the same gender have really good chemistry and would make a good couple. Rick Riordan is also like super guilty of that. So like no drags there. It's just like open your eyes sometimes. But in Sarah J Maas's world, she has introduced like gay characters or like queer characters, but I don't think she really thinks about how her other aspects of world building affect that. Mm-hmm. Like I remember in the Court of Thorns and Roses books at one point it's introduced the idea that when like a pair mates, the female, because she calls them females and males, which also drives me crazy, but that's irrelevant. The females like cook a meal for the males and present it to them, and that's like a sign of them like accepting the mating bond. But how does that work when both of them are female or both of them are male? It's like one of those things where I think she's like, oh, I need to include gay characters because I'll get in trouble if I don't, or I'll get more people will read my books if I do. But she doesn't really think about the ways that like her world building She doesn't think about how they like interact with her world, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Like, I think I haven't so I haven't finished the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, but I'm remembering, I think the very obvious criticism was towards Moore, who was supposedly gay but sleeps with men, but is actually gay.
Yeah, it like, okay, here's the thing. Some women would identify as like lesbians or like preferring women and still sleep with men. Maybe they just like doing it or whatever, but it's also kind of a problematic implication with a character when, especially because she had this whole thing going on with what's his name, Asriel, something like that.
I don't know.
It was like Cassian and Asriel. I'm forgetting names. It's been too long since I read them. Or maybe not long enough. But like she had this whole thing going on with this other character throughout the whole thing where he's in love with her, and she's like seemingly aware of his feelings and constantly sleeping with other men, and like an attempt to like dissuade him or something.
That's a good message to send, Sarah.
Yeah, he's never like really dissuaded. And so I remember seeing people discussing this and were saying like, oh, in the first few books, it's kind of seen as like this cute, oh, she just needs to like build up her confidence and realize that like she's like good enough for him and not like broken or whatever. And then it'll be a cute relationship when they get together. But then in the third book, Moore's like, oh yeah, I prefer women. It's implied that she's like a lesbian who goes around sleeping with men for some reason, which is like, again, like, why? It to me it feels like her going, oh, I made everyone in this straight, I should make someone gay. Well, I'll just pick a name out of a hat. Moore, that she's a lesbian now.
I don't understand.
That's what it felt like. And then what's that other character's name? The like crazy old demon lady. What's her name? Okay. She's like a really cool character.
I'm going to look it up.
And I'm trying to find what her name is, but I cannot remember it. But she, like, through a lot of the books, like the first two books, she didn't have like any love interest. She didn't seem to have like any interest in that kind of stuff at all. And so a lot of people were like, oh, ace rep? We don't get that very often. And then in the third book, out of nowhere, she's suddenly like obsessed with this one guy. Amryn, that's her name. Amryn, yeah. Like in the third book, all of a sudden she has this like male love interest that just comes out of nowhere, and she's like super like into him and stuff. And I remember reading it and going like, hold on, what? This seems very out of character for you, Amryn.
Shit. No.
In my opinion, Amryn also qualifies as queerbaiting. Anyway, I think we've talked enough about Sarah J Maas. Sorry, Gabe.
Sorry.
It's okay. Listen, I got Throne of Glass like during the summer. I still haven't touched it.
You probably shouldn't.
Partially because I've had such harsh recommendations, but I still want to read it.
Yeah. Wait till we get to that fucking Sarah J Maas episode. That's gonna be a fun unloading of emotion.
That's partially why I want to read it. I need to be there. I need to be there to hear y'all ranting.
All right. Okay.
But anyway, on a related note, I think this transitions nicely into Cassandra Clare because they write in the same genre.
Yeah. Let's talk about Cassandra Clare. And you're going to have to take lead here, Alex, because it's been a while since I've read Cassandra Clare's work.
Yeah, I'm going to talk specifically about The Infernal Devices, which is the second trilogy she wrote that takes place in like London. It's like a prequel, takes place in London like in the 1900s or something. I don't remember when exactly. And actually I wanted to bring this up relevant to Sherlock because I was not able to find it, but I remember reading something years ago where Cassandra Clare said very specifically that she was inspired by Sherlock to have like queerbaiting in this particular trilogy. So I just thought that was an
great.
interesting tidbit. But anyway, the Infernal Devices, this is the Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, Clockwork Princess books. They follow this girl named Tessa Gray, something like that. And she's from New York, and she travels to London to meet her brother, and she meets like these shadow hunters, finds out she's a warlock, and she in particular meets these two shadow hunters, Will Herondale, aka the worst character in anything ever, and I hate him a lot, and and James Carstairs, I think that's his full name, who goes by Jem.
Oh God, Carstairs is a name that I would have came up with when I was 11.
It's like an actual name.
I know, but still.
And it does fit her like shadow hunter naming pattern that she has. But yeah, so you got James Carstairs, Will Herondale, Will and Jem. Technically, it's a love triangle. You have Tessa. She has these two options, Jem and Will. I don't know why Will's on the table at all, if I'm being honest, because he's literally awful to her at every opportunity. We can save this for a different episode, because I don't know what if we were doing the least favorite character episode, or if we did that already.
We're going to do it. We haven't done it yet. Good
to know. Yes, I will talk about him in that episode.
Yay! I'm excited.
Spoiler alert. But basically, Will's character, like his character personality, is he's awful to everyone except for Jem. Jem is like his best friend, and like he's the only character in the entire series that Will is not a complete asshole to. Which, like, right off the bat, you have, like, again, I don't like Will as a character, but you have this very obvious setup for these two characters to be shipped together. You have, like, this sweet, like, angel-like character, probably the nicest character that Cassandra Clare has ever written. Probably, like, one of my favorite characters in all of her book series, which I've read too many of. And then you have this, like, complete and utter asshole who sucks to everyone, but then is soft for this one character. Like, you know, those like ship dynamic memes have been all over the place recently. This is like one of those. You know, it's the grumpy one is sweet for the sunshiny one. You know, it's like one of those very tropey things that everyone like sees and is like, you're supposed to like appreciate the relationship between these two characters. In the end, again, nothing comes of it because James dies, sort of. I would say spoiler alert, but like, don't read her books.
Jesus Christ, Alex.
What? I have opinions. I don't think people should read these books. Regardless, spoiler alert if you care. But yeah, at the end of the trilogy, James dies. I'm putting that in quotation marks because he doesn't actually die. And then Tessa ends up married to Will, which I have a lot of feelings about that I won't go into here. But it's just like this whole setup is between these two characters with this dynamic. And it's so obvious that she wanted people to ship these two characters and be like, oh, maybe they'll end up together. Maybe they are together. Oh, maybe it's polyamorous rap. You don't know. It's not.
Slight off thing, but oh my god, they really don't do a lot of polyam rap, do they?
They don't. It's because it's like super taboo in our society. Yeah. Like it's like more taboo than like being gay is, which is impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of like poly or ace reps. I've noticed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there isn't a lot of ace rep either.
Yeah, I think that is partially because, like, especially in like a fandom space, I feel like it's hard to have ace characters because a lot of fandom participation is in shipping. And as soon as you have like an ace character, you can't write that smutty, sexy fan fiction that everyone wants to read anymore.
Oh yeah, because those are always great.
I also do I kind of get it. Like writing an ace character is probably like hard to do without making it very explicit that they're ace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you? It's also one of those things where I find this when I'm writing trans characters as well. Is it's how do you find the balance of making it like explicit that they are ace or trans or gay without having them be like, "Hello, I am ace," every like 5 seconds.
Yeah. Like there's a character in one of the new Mass Effect games who just shows up in her first line. She dead names herself and outs herself to the protagonist without any representation whatsoever.
Yikes! That's a yikes from me.
Holy shit!
Yeah,
no,
it's very bizarre.
Yeah, so that's problematic. But then again, with like the ace or the trans characters, it's about finding that balance of making it explicitly canon that they are ace or trans without like making it their whole personality as well.
Yeah.
It's an important balance to strike because you don't want to come off as like I hate using this term, but virtue signaling.
You know what? I think we can touch on that later, actually. So, kind of like, right now, I think after talking about examples, like we have been talking about examples for quite a while, I think let's now just like really discuss like the main issues when it comes to queer baiting. And I think, the fact that it's a marketing tool isn't so bugging me. Like, it's like, I understand, you know, to get wider audiences, film companies and TV companies have to appeal to certain audiences, right? But it's the fact that it has been so poorly mishandled, and the way that it is right now is what annoys me.
Yeah, I actually did have
thing like there's been few and far between like positive spotlights of queer characters, much less queer relationships that have actually been all right, or like you know, not problematic. Like everything, a lot of what we've been talking about, like queer relationships, are hinted at, but then somehow they either get waved off. They're either you know, the individual people are then shipped off with their straight or with the straight counterpart, not, you know, like obviously they then become in a straight relationship, or it's just poorly handled, and that shit ain't good.
I actually did have one more example that I think kind of actually is relevant to like everything you just said, which is the cartoon Voltron, Legendary Defender. Can you hear the mocking in my voice as I say it?
You've had that tone in your voice since this episode started, Alex.
I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. These shows deserve it. These things deserve it. But I think this is like something. I think Voltron is very relevant to this marketing conversation in particular, because like when the show first came out, people were like, "Oh, it's animated by some of the same people who worked on Legend of Korra," which is notably like a show that has kind of like opened the doors a little bit for having more queer rep in like children's media. So there was and also it was on Netflix, and at the time Netflix had a better reputation in terms of like having queer characters in their shows. Its reputation has obviously gone hella down the drain in more recent years, which is probably partially Voltron's fault, actually. But I remember like when the show first came out, there was a lot of hope that there would be queer characters in the show and that they would be handled respectfully. This was, if you know anything about Voltron, clearly not the case. But I remember like when season 7, I think, came out, the banner on Netflix had like the one character that was confirmed to be gay and had like the rainbow flag background on it, when in that season they had introduced that character's past love interest for the first time. And then in like like a less than a minute long scene where they basically just yelled at each other. And then in season 8, I think it was in season 8, it's been too long, but like in either season 7 or season 8, that love interest character was killed off in like a quick scene, almost off screen.
Oh my god. No.
Yeah.
God damn it.
There was also the characters, two of the main characters, Keith and Lance, which, like, if you've been anywhere on the internet community, you probably know about this, but like there's these two characters, Keith and Lance, who from season 1 were like a really popular ship. And this was, again, something that was played up a lot in the writing, at least in like the first few seasons. In later seasons, when the writing went to shit, everything else also went to shit. But like in the first few seasons, like there was a lot of playing up of this potential relationship between these two characters. And then in season 7 or 8, Lance was shoved into a romance with a character that it was a really poorly built up relationship. It could have been good. Even I can admit that it could have been good if they had actually dealt with it properly, but it wasn't. He was just shoved into a straight relationship and then she died. So he was just miserable. And then the other character didn't really get anything. And then the one character that was confirmed to be gay in season 7, by the way, this was their planned gay rep from the beginning. He was killed off in season 2, brought back in season 3, confirmed gay in season 7, and then in the last 5 seconds of the last episode of season 8, he got married to some random dude that had never been introduced to the show before.
Why are they fucking doing this?
And this was a show that like hinged half of its marketing on having queer rep.
Oh my god.
I didn't even mention the lesbians that die immediately after being confirmed lesbians, and also gay, and also villains.
That's burying your gays. That's another great trope that we can't touch.
And also evil gay characters, which is another trope that we don't have time to touch on.
Oh my god. Okay. There's clearly so much to touch on, and let's try and not get so distracted. So let's reel it back to... No, it's fine. Let's reel it back to, I guess, some of the issues that we have with it. So, like I had said, my biggest issue isn't exactly the fact that it is a marketing tool. Like, you know, you have to attract audiences somehow. It's just how it's been handled so far. And that is important now, like how you market to queer audiences. Obviously a varied thing, obviously a group that has faced a lot of like scrutiny over the years, whether you've been, you know, gay, lesbian, trans, ace, aro, like it's something that's representation for those groups is needed, and it's needed to be done well, because we're in a climate now where we can comfortably talk about these things. That we're now free to express ourselves and, you know, find out who we like, who we don't like, and all that stuff. And see, forcing it is one other thing too. Like, I don't want to get too much into forcing it, but like when two characters have such a natural chemistry, and I guess this is more just on queer relationships, but like when they have such good chemistry, how showrunners handle that is important. And if they decide to butcher it and make it a very like queerbaity thing, that's not good. It's not good for the community, and it's not basically good for the show, because who's really going to be paying attention to it? Who's that for? Right? Same thing with it's the same thing with like any kind of like relationship in storytelling. Like in a book, who is that half-assed queerbaity relationship for if it's not for, you know, if it's an initial pull to get queer audiences, they're gonna turn off by the time they realize that this thing is shit.
Here's the thing about queerbaiting is I feel like no matter who does it, it's a lose-lose situation, because like a lot of the times people will do queerbaiting in order to, you know, draw in a queer audience while maintaining a straight audience,
Yeah.
like the homophobic audience, shall I say, or like not turning off viewers that might find, you know, queer representation distasteful or whatever. Like, but at the same time, if you're going to play up this queer relationship, queer people are going to notice. They're going to get mad at you when they realize that they were baited. But if you play it up too much, then the homophobes are also going to get mad at you for even daring to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just like driving away two opposite audiences. And who does that leave you with?
Jerry.
I'm assuming in this case, Jerry is someone who fetishizes lesbians.
I don't know who the fuck Jerry is. That's just the first name that came to my head. But no, you're right. Like, as much as like I will adamantly stand that homophobes fucking suck. For a TV company, it's probably, you know, for a TV series, like, viewership still matters. Be it, you know, whichever side of the, whichever side or however you identify as. So you're right, finding that balance is difficult. But even then, like, how, like, poorly representing one side of that isn't good, and it certainly won't bring in any new audiences by the time people know better. And we are in a climate that knows better. Like, we're not so easily fooled anymore. Like, we know queerbaiting is queerbaiting, and we know that we know now that, like, this is clearly not good representation, because when you have shows like She-Ra who are representing queer characters well, more people are like, more of the community is going to be turned on to that, and for good reason, because apparently She-Ra is fucking amazing.
It's so good.
But when it comes to other more mainstream shows, I think they still, or like mainstream in general, be it mainstream TV shows, movies, books, they still fail to understand one crucial thing, in my opinion, and that is queer people are fucking people. They're not something that you parade around.
Yeah, cough, cough, Riverdale.
Yeah, like, they're not. Like, that's been the message for how many years for the community, is just treat us like fucking people. Like, we're not some kind of circus act, and we're not here to, you know, defy the norms just because of whatever. Like, we got our own shit, man, and there's a lot that queer characters deliver in storytelling. Like I said, She-Ra is a great example of representing queer characters well. And even in video games, like Life is Strange, for its potential queer baitiness, I think like the relationship between Max and Chloe is pretty nice. Same thing with Rachel and Chloe, and that's, I don't know how well they've been doing it, and I'm probably stepping on glass here, but like, I don't know, I liked it. But it's just the thing of like trying to, I guess, like, my main issue with queerbaiting essentially is just, if you're going to be using a marketing, like, if you're, you know, like, there's nothing wrong with using the marketing tool. It's just that, understand that this marketing tool means a lot more than you think.
Basically, I think what your point is if you're gonna use like queer characters and queer relationships as a marketing tool, fucking commit to it and don't be a coward.
Yeah. Like, so I guess before we actually touch on, you know, what we can do to address it, let's I want to spend like a couple minutes talking about like how it applies to our book, which is also what we did with the Hunger Games era episode. So I've stated on podcast before that Porter is bisexual, Magna is lesbian, as well as a few other characters that are openly like, or at least I'm like I've stated before that like they are very much queer, and that in no way was meant for me to be like, you know, this is going to be attracting solely the queer audience. Like, I obviously want it to be a good story in general for everybody, but I understand that having a bisexual protagonist, a lesbian deuteragonist, is important. And it has been, more than anything, my sole responsibility to make sure that I am translating them properly. And the definition of properly has always been just write them as people. Or like, write them as good characters. Like, don't force the fact that they, you know, don't force the fact that it's a same-sex relationship, because, you know, as much as I would rather not have a bunch of homophobes reading my book, you know, there's probably a lot of young readers who are still undecided, and at least that book gives them something, right? It teaches, like, I would hope that it teaches young people to be, you know, like, you could be queer, you could be straight, whatever, but like, ultimately just learn how to respect people, learn how to respect beliefs that aren't yours. But I think I'm just going on a wild tangent. But Alex, how about you? When it came to because you've talked about the Diamond Dagger so much, and you've mentioned that Alhe is Arrow Ace.
She sure is.
Yeah, so talk about that. Like, how is it the discussion of queer baiting and all that? Like, how is that applying to the Diamond Dagger?
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I don't really know how to say this, but it definitely wasn't like a decision that I made for Alhe to be Arrow Ace. It was more like I woke up one day and was like, oh, she's Arrow Ace. I just didn't realize before now. I have this experience a lot with my characters where I'll just be like, oh, wait, they are whatever, and I didn't notice until now. But, like, I think with Alhe, it was actually, in terms of, like, queer, writing about queer characters, I feel like I'm definitely on the side where all my characters are queer unless stated otherwise. But it's still something that I can't just say that and expect people to get that. Like, it has to be written into the text. And so that's something that I've been working on as a writer, is how do I make it obvious that this character is Arrow Ace? How do I make it obvious that this character is a lesbian? How do I make it obvious that this character is trans, you know? And, like, go through and make sure that, like, my words as, you know, the word of God, if I ever get to that level, is like accurate to what's in the text. Because, you know, it's one of those things where, like, a lot of times there's, like, all this debate about whether or not you trust the word of God. In this case, word of God referring to the things that the author or, like, writer has said outside of the text itself. And, like, this is where certain things come into play, where a producer of a show will be like, oh, this character's gay. But if that's not in the text itself, if it's not backed up, it's really easy for people to disregard, you know, death of the author is a thing that should be applied in some cases, but in other cases, and I think that death of the author should be applied in a lot of cases, because if it's not in the text, then it's not in the text. So if you're going to say that a character is gay, they have to be gay. Commit, damn it, don't be a coward.
Don't also change canon how many years later just to suit the audience, because we can see right through that too.
Not naming names, but if you know, you know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of us know by now, or at least like some of the more infamous examples. But, you know, we don't need to touch on that. Well, we can.
If you know, you know.
We can trash on what we know eventually, or we can have a full episode to trash on what we know eventually. But, I did want to get someone else's perspective on this, and that is Gabe's, who has been relatively quiet for this episode, because and you know, that's not without intention. So, Gabe has said before we started recording that you know, he identifies as straight, but he is very much a straight ally. So I'd love to hear like how he feels on queer baiting after what we talked about and what he knew about before.
Queerbaiting is a subject that's like pretty new to me. I think the only examples that I like really knew of before going into this episode were I'd heard of like the Supergirl fiasco before. I think Sherlock was the only one that I was like truly familiar with in terms of like other people making reference to it. Because I'd seen the show. I'd seen how weirdly preoccupied Moffat is with drawing attention to like having characters be like, oh, two men, oh, how queer, and like there's that whole scene. I was resident bringing up. There's that whole scene where like it's like the fan fiction circle or whatever, and they're all like debating how Sherlock survives. And they like have that weird bit how one of them like theorizes that Sherlock and Moriarty were like in a romantic cahoots, and it's like a weird jab at the fan base for shipping characters that they queer coded.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even touch on Moriarty, but Moriarty's a whole other bag of worms.
Moriarty is a big flamboyant mess, and I don't know what they were thinking.
I mean, it comes down to queer coding villains, to try and draw in a queer audience. It's another super problematic part of Sherlock. Add it to the list.
Oh God. We learn something new every day when we trash on something. Sorry, Gabe, what were you saying?
I think like as a straight author who's written gay characters and trans characters, like I would say like there are a lot of people who are like, oh, you're things. Oh, it's just you're just thinking too hard about it. Oh, it's just your own personal interpretation. I think it's very difficult to intentionally write a character or a dynamic between two characters that is so deeply gay, but then like isn't.
You'd be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I have several examples I could name if you want me to. Tolkien, Rick Riordan, Sarah J Maas.
Oh no, I'm not talking about like queerbaiting. I'm talking about like because like.
Yeah,
I am talking about queerbaiting, but I'm saying like it's very hard to unintentionally write like that sort of dynamic. Like I think it's once you like speak to people who are actually experienced with this sort of thing and speak to people who are a part of the LGBT community, like the writings on the walls become a lot clearer, and you can start to see like the stuff like it's like Poe and Finn, their whole relationship. You can start to see it for what it is. Like, don't even bring this up. Poe sees Finn again in the first movie, and he sees Finn wearing his jacket, and Finn's like goes to give him back his jacket, and he says, "No, keep it. It suits you." He fucking bites his lip harder than I have ever seen anyone bite his lip. It's fucking absurd.
Acting choices also.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Like, it's if you just Google Poe lip bites, it's one of the first results. It's like so intense.
All right, well, I'm gonna do. I know what I'm gonna do after a podcast.
Yeah, that's just one of the major ones, and I think like I don't know. I think it's something that if you're going to try to write gay characters, I think you do have to like make it explicit. You shouldn't try to just do it if you're not going to write gay characters because like you think that's the right move for those characters. If you're just writing them for like you want to have a quota, or you think like it'll get you marketing points, or you want to have gay characters for a bit, like just don't do it. Just don't. Yeah. Like it's better to just not have the representation if you're going to have bad representation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, honestly, I think like in terms of queerbaiting, it is a marketing tool, and if you're going to use it, then use it properly.
Yeah.
Like just especially like I think it's like no matter what, like you may be like a queer author, but even then it's still I think it would still be important to to discuss queer characters with other queer writers. Like as a queer writer, like I talk to Alex, who is also another queer writer, and we bounce ideas and work off of each other all the time, and that is what's helping our stuff get better.
Yeah, and it's also like on that note, because even as like a queer person, you're only one type of queer, and there's so many different types. Like, you know, I would identify as queer myself, but like I'm not like trans. I'm not like a lesbian. I haven't gone through like those specific experiences, and so I feel like if you're especially with like trans and like non-binary characters, if you're not someone who's been through that experience and you want to write about those kinds of characters, you really need to talk up to other people who have had those experiences, because otherwise you're not going to be able to write it well.
Mm-hmm. And even if you are even if you do identify as bisexual or gay or more or less just queer in general, it would still benefit you to reach out to the people in your community. I can kind of write from the perspective of a bisexual writer, but that doesn't mean I am 100% certain that Porter will turn out a good representative of that community, because it is just still my perspective, and my perspective could be wrong. So
yeah, and it's also again, you're a man, your character's a woman, so there's also going to be that dynamic. And even if there wasn't, like, you're still, like, again, this comes back to queer people are people. Yeah. Every queer person is going to be different and have vastly different experiences, even if they like identify under the same label. And so yeah, it's definitely very important to talk to other queer people. Yeah. Not even just like queer writers, just like queer people in general, and get their input on that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's another thing too, actually, like while we're still discussing this, it is not like just because a character is queer does not make them that completely. Like,
yeah.
I've kind of phrased it terribly, but like queer characters are not solely queer. There's so much more to them. Like, queer characters can be badass fighters, or like smooth talkers, or, you know, very shy, timid people. They can be, you know, they can be world saviors. They should be world saviors, honestly. And as people, like, I don't know why that's such a hard thing to comprehend. Like, it's thing, like, it is still something that like boggles my mind, and it's going to take us a while to get there. But like, that's why it starts, I think, with us, or like with writers like us, to define the example that we want, and for, you know, just to better educate ourselves on queer stories. Like, we are aware of what queerbaiting is. We know how people use it, and we know the botched examples of it. So we got to do better. We should.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I don't really have much else to contribute, or don't really have anything else to kind of add on to that.
I have one further contribution.
Go ahead.
I think, because we were talking about marketing earlier, and we've been kind of talking about like what we can do to change it. And you said we need to like be the writers we want to see in the world, as it were. And I don't want to get into like an anti-capitalist rant or anything, because we don't have the time for that. But
we do have the characters for it.
But I do think that it's the commodification of everything that is partially to blame for this. Partially, there's other factors. But it's a marketing tool. People want people to buy their books or watch their TV show or watch their movies. And so they're looking for any way to get in the highest amount of readers / watchers, like audience possible. That is the goal of someone creating, especially like a big budget TV show or a movie, or like the goal of like a popular author is to be popular, because when you're popular, you make money. And so I think that a big problem that like a big part of where queerbaiting has originated from is people realizing that there's a queer audience that wants queer content. And if they find out that something has queer content, they'll go watch it or read it and give the creators money. And as a result, but then, they also don't want to isolate their not queer audience that might take offense to that. So then they try to find the balance of how do I keep the biggest audience possible, and that leads to queerbaiting. So basically my point is fuck capitalism, and and we need to start a revolution.
Jesus Christ. Out of everyone who's worthy of talking about character development, Alex's, since we started talking, has definitely been like the most fun to talk about. Because like in the
Am I wrong?
No, it's just amazing to hear that from you. Because like the thing, and this is not to like shit on you in any way, like we love you, Alex, but like in the beginning when we first started doing these podcasts, you were always like, like you were open to like talking, but at some point, you didn't swear as much. You certainly didn't say fuck capitalism, and you never wanted to incite a revolution. But here we are, and I think that's partially Gabe and I's fault, so I'm sorry.
It's not your fault, it's the state of the world.
Yeah, 2020 really woke us up, didn't it? Isn't that fucking irony?
Aren't you excited to see what crazy thing happens in the States tomorrow on the 5th Wednesday of the year?
Oh my god. Okay, before we kind of branch out into that, let's wrap up for tonight, because we are pretty much done. Let's end it on wanting to incite a revolution. So
good night. I've said my piece.
All right, so thanks for listening, everybody. You can find all of our social media down in the description below, as well as individually. I am at Daniel Cordero on Instagram and Twitter. Alex is at Whimsical Empyrean on Instagram. And how do you say your Twitter handle and your Discord name outside of thing?
Oh, don't follow me on Twitter. But
okay, sorry. Okay, well then I have. Yeah, all right, well now I have to take your name out of the description. So don't follow Alex on Twitter, but follow Alex on Twitter. And Gabe is at Pepsi Chamber on Instagram. Do you have a Twitter, Gabe?
No, I will never have Twitter.
All right. Yeah, don't. Twitter's a cesspool. Love you, Twitter.
Twitter's a nightmare.
Yeah. All right. As a final send off, I was thinking, what was I thinking? Oh fuck. I think what can we hope for in terms of like better representation and moving away from botching queerbaiting, because queerbaiting is a marketing tool, and we are understanding that it's a marketing tool, but like it's been botched so many times. So like what can we expect to kind of better represent queer characters? And I think like for me that would probably, if I haven't already stated that would just be like starting by writing them as people, but also like giving them the main protagonist slot would probably be a better help too, because like a lot of queer characters that I've noticed in the media have been like, they may have been protagonists now, but it's only recently. So I guess that's a start. Like emphasize bisexual characters as the main protagonist. Have butch lesbians as your main protagonists. Like the more normalized we have with these, like with more diverse characters, like it'll just hopefully help us get her to, or better represent these groups. I think. Like, put them at the forefront, let them prove themselves, right?
Mm-hmm. And actually expanding on that, this is actually a really, really big problem for trans representation in that I watched a video essay about this like a couple years ago, but trans characters, if they are portrayed as the main character in a show or a movie, they are almost always played by a cis actor pretending to be trans.
Yeah, fuck that.
And if they have a trans actor playing a trans character, they're always a side character. So basically my point is cast trans actors as trans characters that are also the main character. Please and thank you. Also, fuck capitalism.
Incite revolutions.
But yeah, no, so that's definitely something I agree with. There needs to be more queer characters. They need to just be characters that also happen to be queer, and they need to be in main roles. We also need to let queer writers and queer directors and queer actors like take the spotlight as well. Like having the whole Sia situation popped into my head, but that's about neurodivergent people, not queer people. But it's like listen to queer people when you're trying to write their stories. Like I don't want to ever be the kind of person who's like, oh no, straight people can never write about queer people, blah blah blah, because I don't think that's true. But I think that there needs to be an acknowledgement that if you don't have an experience, you can't write about it as an expert, and you need to be willing to listen to criticism from the people that you are writing about, because they're going to know better than you. This applies like beyond queer experiences too. This also applies to like race and like neurodivergency and like disabilities and stuff as well. So I think that would be my biggest thing, is like listen to people.
And like quickly touching back on what you were talking about, like giving queer actors, directors more representation. Yeah, absolutely do that. Like, you know, give credit where credit is due. Like, you know, if there are good people out there in Hollywood, yeah, that's great. Like, you can rely on them to sell out a movie theater. But I think especially when it comes to queer-centered stories, be sure to include queer everything. Like, yeah, like, you know, give more opportunities to like queer actors and queer directors and queer production staff and queer makeup artists. Like, give them more opportunities. Like, maybe you decide to settle on like a top makeup artist as the thing, as like the person for the movie. That is fine, but suddenly if you were purposefully excluding like queer chances, no, fuck you. Just give people chances. If they, let them, like I had said, let them prove themselves, and let them show you that, you know, in a lot of circumstances, they're probably better than you.
And also, actually, sorry, just let me expand on that one more time.
We're just never gonna end this episode, are we?
I'm sorry, but this is important. But also, don't think that one person is good enough. You know, if you have like a TV show and you're like, oh, I have one queer actor on the show, that's not good enough. Like, don't listen to one queer person. Listen to like groups of people. There are lots of queer people. I know it's considered like a minority still, but it's like there's a lot, but like there's fucking 8 billion people on Earth or something. I don't even know. And even a small percentage of that is a lot of fucking people. So like, yeah, and all of them are going to have different experiences. So don't think that one is good enough.
Like, oh, we have one like gay character, or we have one bisexual like protagonist. No, that shit ain't enough.
Tokenism is a problem.
Yeah, don't do that. Like, you can't just suddenly be like, we're good, right? We can't, like, we have one member of your like millions others as the person. No.
Hey, at Winx reboot, one isn't good enough.
All right. I think before we just go on and burn all of Hollywood down, let's actually stop for tonight. So thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good night. You guys aren't going to say no? Okay.
Good night.
Good night.